I'm Drew Lindsey, 28, and I thought I knew what family meant until the night my contractions started during our weekly Sunday dinner. As I gripped the dining room table, gasping through another wave of pain, my mother actually laughed. "Stop being dramatic, Drew," she said, not even looking up from her plate. "Finish serving the dessert first." My sister smirked, rolling her eyes like I was putting on some elaborate performance. Even my husband sat there, more concerned about his mother's disapproval than his wife going into labor with their first child. But what happened in that moment, and what I discovered about my family's true priorities, would change everything. Sometimes the most painful contractions aren't the ones bringing new life into the world. They're the ones that finally break the illusions you've been carrying about the people who should love you most. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, the story is for you. Asterisk, looking back, I should have seen the signs long before that Sunday night. The family portrait hanging in my parents' hallway told a different story than the truth five smiling faces posed perfectly, projecting the image of a loving, close-knit family. But photos lie, don't they? They capture a single moment, not the years of subtle dismissals and conditional love that came before and after the camera clicked. I'd always been the accommodating one. The daughter who showed up early to help set the table, who stayed late to wash dishes, who never complained when plans changed at the last minute to suit everyone else's needs. Sunday dinners had been our family tradition for as long as I could remember, and I took pride in helping make them special. I'd arrive at my parents' house by 3 o'clock, arms full of grocery bags and my famous apple crisp, ready to spend the afternoon cooking alongside my mother. "Drew's here." Mom would call out, but it wasn't really an announcement of my arrival. It was more like announcing that the help had arrived. I'd tie on my apron and get to work chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, setting the table with the good china. My sister Sarah would drift in around 5:30, just as everything was nearly ready, looking perfectly put together in her designer clothes. She'd accept a glass of wine and settle into her favorite chair, regaling us with stories about her latest promotion or vacation plans. Mark, my husband of 3 years, had fallen easily into this family rhythm. He'd shake hands with my father, accept a beer, and join the men in the living room to watch whatever game was on. He never offered to help in the kitchen. It wasn't expected of him, after all. That was women's work, specifically Drew's work. During my pregnancy, I'd been so excited about adding a new member to our family dynamic. I imagined Sunday dinners with a high chair pulled up to the table, everyone taking turns holding the baby, sharing stories about what they wanted to teach their new grandchild or nephew. I pictured my mother knitting tiny sweaters, my father building a toy chest, my sister buying adorable outfits. I saw Mark becoming more protective and attentive, stepping up as we transitioned into parenthood together. At 8 months pregnant, I was still showing up early, still cooking and serving, though my back ached and my feet swelled. When I'd mention feeling tired, Mom would wave it off. "Pregnancy isn't an illness, Drew. Women have been having babies and keeping house for centuries." When I'd ask if maybe we could order takeout one Sunday, Sarah would laugh and say, "But then what would you do with yourself?" "Cooking is your thing?" "My thing." As if I'd chosen to be the family servant rather than having the role thrust upon me through years of conditioning and the path of least resistance. But I smiled and nodded because keeping everyone happy had become my specialty, my identity, my cage. The Sunday everything changed started like all the others. I'd been having mild cramping all day, but at 38 weeks, that seemed normal. First babies are usually late, everyone said. I had at least 2 weeks left, maybe more. So I stuffed the turkey, whipped the potatoes, and arranged the salad, ignoring the way my body seemed to be preparing for something my mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. That family portrait still hangs in my parents' hallway. But now when I see it, I don't see love and unity. I see a carefully constructed facade, and I remember the little girl in the middle who learned too early that her worth was measured by how well she served others, not by the simple fact that she existed. By the time we sat down to eat, the cramping had evolved into something more rhythmic, more insistent. My hospital bag sat by our front door at home, packed and ready for weeks, a detail my family had mocked as typical Drew, always over-preparing for everything. Now, as I felt another wave of tightness grip my belly, I wished I'd brought it with me. I tried to focus on the conversation flowing around the table, but the pain was becoming harder to ignore. Dad was telling a story about his golf game, gesturing with his fork, while Sarah scrolled through photos on her phone, showing off her latest weekend getaway to Napa. Mark was nodding along politely, occasionally glancing at me with the kind of mild concern you might show for someone with a headache. "Drew, the gravy boat is empty," Mom said. Not as a request, but as a statement of fact that clearly required my immediate attention. I started to stand, then gripped the edge of the table as another contraction hit stronger this time. Impossible to ignore. The sensation wrapped around my entire midsection like a tight band, making me gasp involuntarily. This wasn't the Braxton Hicks contractions I'd been experiencing for weeks. This was the real thing. "Oh my God," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. That's when my mother laughed. Not a nervous laugh or a sympathetic chuckle, but an actual amused laugh, as if I'd just told a joke. "Stop being dramatic, Drew. Finish serving first." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the table, expecting anyone to recognize that I was in genuine distress. Instead, I saw annoyance. Sarah rolled her eyes dramatically. "Seriously, Drew, right now? We're in the middle of dinner." I think I began, trying to catch Mark's eye, trying to communicate the urgency of what was happening. "You think too much," Dad interrupted with a chuckle. "First-time mothers always panic over nothing. Your mother was in labor with you for 8 hours, and she didn't make a peep until the very end." Mark finally looked at me directly, but instead of concern, I saw embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me, by my scene, by the way I was disrupting the family dinner with my inconvenient biology. "Maybe we should wait until after dessert," he suggested quietly. "You know how much your mom was looking forward to that apple crisp you made." I felt something break inside me, not physically, but emotionally. Here I was, possibly in active labor with their grandchild, their nephew, their stepson, and they were worried about dessert service and maintaining the Sunday dinner schedule. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, and I couldn't suppress the small sound that escaped my lips. Sarah actually huffed in irritation. "This is so like you, Drew. You can't even let us have one peaceful family dinner without making it all about you." That's when something shifted. Call it maternal instinct, or just plain self-preservation, but I realized that if I didn't advocate for myself and my baby, no one else would. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and started timing the contractions properly. 7 minutes apart, then 5, then 4. "I need to go to the hospital," I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice despite the chaos in my body. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Mom said, finally looking directly at me. "You're not even due for 2 weeks. This is just false labor. Eat your dinner and stop being such a drama queen." But I was already standing, my hand pressed against my lower back where the pain seemed to radiate from. "This isn't false labor. These are real contractions, and they're getting closer together." The room fell silent except for the sound of forks against plates as everyone continued eating, as if I hadn't just announced that I was going into labor. As if the potential arrival of a new family member was less important than finishing the mashed potatoes before they got cold. Mark sighed heavily, the sound of a man being asked to do something terribly inconvenient. "If we really have to go," he said, emphasizing the word have like it was optional, "can't we at least finish eating first?" The hospital will just send us home anyway if it's too early. I looked around the table one more time at my mother's annoyed expression, at my sister's barely concealed eye roll, at my father's continued focus on his plate, at my husband's reluctant resignation. And for the first time in my 28 years, I realized that I was completely, utterly alone in a room full of people who were supposed to love me most. No, I said, and the word hung in the air like a foreign sound. We're leaving now. The car ride to the hospital was a masterclass in passive aggression. Mark drove with the careful precision of someone doing a favor they deeply resented, while my mother-in-law called him 3 times in the first 10 minutes to express her disappointment about the abandoned dinner. Each time his phone rang, he'd answer it, speaking in soothing tones about how Drew thought she needed to go to the hospital, and how they'd probably be back home within the hour. My own phone sat in my lap, the screen showing my doctor's office number. I tried calling twice, but it was Sunday evening, and I'd only reached the answering service. The automated voice had been more sympathetic than my family, telling me that someone would call me back shortly, and that if this was an emergency, I should go directly to the hospital. Between contractions, I tried to make sense of what had just happened at dinner. Had I really been that dramatic? Was I overreacting to what might just be strong Braxton Hicks contractions? The doubt crept in because it always did. I'd been trained my entire life to question my own instincts, to defer to others' judgment about my own experiences, but then another contraction would hit, and the pain would cut through the doubt like a knife. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't drama or attention-seeking or first-time mother nerves. This was real, and it was happening whether my family wanted to acknowledge it or not. You know, Mark said during one of the brief respites between phone calls, my mom had a point about the apple crisp. She was really looking forward to it, and now it's just going to sit there getting cold. I turned to stare at him, wondering if I'd somehow married a stranger. Your mother can eat apple crisp anytime she wants, Mark. I'm having contractions 4 minutes apart. Alleged contractions, he corrected, and something cold settled in my chest. You've been wrong about this kind of thing before. Remember, last month when you thought your water broke and it was just what, Mark? My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. Just me being hysterical. Just me not knowing my own body. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I'd insisted on sitting in the back seat where I could stretch out, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Resentment. He resented me for disrupting his comfortable Sunday routine, for making him choose between his wife and his family's expectations, for being inconveniently pregnant at an inconvenient time. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Mom is so upset about dinner being ruined. This better be real labor and not another false alarm. Another text followed immediately. Also, you left the kitchen a complete mess. Thanks a lot. I screenshot both messages, though I couldn't have said why at the time. Some instinct told me I might need evidence later of how my family had responded to what should have been one of the most important nights of my life. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty, and I felt a wave of relief as Mark finally turned off the engine. Whatever happened next, at least we were somewhere people would take my pain seriously. At least we were somewhere people understood that a woman in labor deserved more consideration than the temperature of apple crisp. This is probably unnecessary, Mark said as he helped me out of the car, his voice carrying the tone of someone who wanted credit for being dragged along unwillingly. But I guess it's better to be safe than sorry. I didn't respond because another contraction was building, stronger than any of the others had been. I gripped his arm and braved through it. The way I'd practiced in childbirth class, the classes Mark had attended reluctantly, checking his phone through most of the sessions. As we walked toward the emergency entrance, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked pale and frightened, my hair disheveled from the dinner preparation and the stress of the evening. But there was something else in my face I hadn't seen before, a kind of determination. Maybe it was the mama bear instinct kicking in, or maybe it was just the dawning realization that if I didn't start standing up for myself and my baby, no one else would. The automatic doors slid open, and I stepped into the bright, antiseptic world of the hospital. Behind me, Mark was already on his phone again, probably calling his mother to provide another update about my alleged emergency. But ahead of me was help, validation, and people who would believe that a pregnant woman in pain deserved immediate attention. I approached the reception desk with my hands pressed against my lower back. And when the nurse looked up and saw my face, her expression immediately shifted to one of professional concern. "How can I help you, honey?" she asked, and just the kindness in her voice made my eyes fill with tears. "I think I'm in labor," I said, and for the first time all evening, someone actually listened. The hospital bracelet felt like validation made tangible white plastic proof that Drew Lindsey, DOB March 15th, 1995, was indeed experiencing something real and significant. As the intake nurse snapped it around my wrist, I felt a rush of relief. So intense it brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Let's get you into a room and see what's going on," Nurse Patricia said, her voice warm with the kind of professional compassion I'd been craving all evening. She was probably in her 50s, with graying curls and the confident manner of someone who'd seen thousands of women through labor and delivery. As she wheeled me to the maternity ward, Mark trailed behind, still on his phone. "No, Mom, we're not sure yet," I heard him say. "They're just checking her now. I'm sure we'll be home soon." The examination room was softly lit and peaceful, such a contrast to the chaos of the dinner table I'd fled. Patricia helped me into a hospital gown and had me settled on the bed within minutes, attaching monitors that would track both my contractions and the baby's heartbeat. "When did the contractions start?" she asked, adjusting the equipment with practiced efficiency. "Around 4 this afternoon, but they were mild then. They got much stronger during dinner, maybe around 6:30. She nodded, making notes on her chart. "And how far apart are they now?" "About 3 to 4 minutes. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. 3 to 4 minutes? Honey, why didn't you come in sooner?" Before I could answer, Mark spoke up from his position by the door. Her family was having dinner. "We didn't want to make a big fuss over nothing." The nurse's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but I caught it a flicker of something between surprise and disapproval. "Over nothing?" she repeated, her tone carefully neutral. Another contraction chose that moment to grip me, and I couldn't hide the involuntary sound that escaped my lips. Patricia immediately moved to my side, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Breathe through it, Drew. You're doing great." As the contraction peaked and began to fade, I heard Mark's phone ring again. Without hesitation, he stepped into the hallway to answer it, leaving me alone with Patricia. "Let me check how you're progressing," she said softly, and after a quick examination, her professional mask slipped slightly. "Drew, you're at 6 centimeters. You're definitely in active labor, and you have been for a while." 6 centimeters. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd been in actual, genuine, medically confirmed labor for hours while my family laughed at me and told me to finish serving dinner. I tried to tell them, I whispered, and suddenly I was crying not from pain, but from a mixture of relief and hurt so profound, it felt like it might tear me apart. I tried to tell them it was real. Patricia sat down on the edge of my bed, something I'd never seen a medical professional do before. "Honey, I've been doing this for 26 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you don't make up 6 centimeters of dilation. You've been in labor for hours, and anyone who dismissed what you were experiencing was wrong." The validation felt like cool water on a burn. For the first time since the contractions started, someone was telling me that my experience was real, that my pain mattered, that I deserved to be taken seriously. Mark returned from his phone call just as another contraction began building. How much longer is this going to take? He asked Patricia, checking his watch. It's just that her family is waiting for us to come back and let them know what's happening. Patricia's expression grew noticeably cooler. Mr. Lindsey, your wife, is having a baby. This isn't a minor inconvenience that can be scheduled around a dinner party. She needs your support right now, not your family's timeline. I watched Mark's face flush with embarrassment, but not the kind that comes from recognizing you've been wrong. It was the embarrassment of being called out by a stranger, of having his priorities questioned by someone he couldn't dismiss as easily as he dismissed me. Of course I'm supportive, he said defensively. I'm here, aren't I? But being physically present and being emotionally supportive were two entirely different things. And even Mark seemed to realize how hollow his words sounded in the face of Patricia's steady gaze dot as another contraction built. Patricia coached me through breathing techniques, her presence calm and reassuring. In the hallway, I could hear Mark on his phone again, and I caught fragments of his conversation. The nurse says it's real this time. No, I don't know how long. Yes, I told her we had plans. Plans, as if giving birth to his child was an inconvenience that had interrupted more important plans. Patricia caught my expression and leaned closer. Drew, I need you to focus on yourself and your baby right now. Labor is hard work, and you need to save your energy for what matters. What matters? The phrase echoed in my mind as another contraction peaked. For the first time in my adult life, I was in a situation where what mattered was entirely mine to define. Not my family's comfort, not my husband's convenience, not everyone else's expectations and schedules and plans. What mattered was me and my baby, and we were going to be okay. As the hours passed and labor intensified, my mind drifted to memories that suddenly seemed crystal clear moments I'd buried or rationalized. That now felt like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Sarah's wedding album lived on the coffee table in my parents' living room, open perpetually to the same spread of photos from her perfect day 3 years ago. 400 guests, a venue that cost more than most people's cars, and flowers flown in from Ecuador because Sarah had fallen in love with a particular shade of orchid. The family had spent months planning every detail, everyone pitching in. With enthusiasm and excitement, I remembered sitting at the kitchen table during one of the many wedding planning sessions, 8 months pregnant with the baby who is now making his way into the world. Sarah had been stressed about the seating chart, worried that great Aunt Helen might not get along with Cousin Marie. Drew can figure it out, Mom had said without looking up from the vendor contracts spread across the table. She's good at managing people and making everyone happy. And I had figured it out, spending 3 evenings rearranging names and relationships like pieces of a complex social puzzle, making sure everyone would be comfortable and content. When the wedding day came, the seating arrangement worked perfectly. Sarah received dozens of compliments about how thoughtful and well-organized everything was. But when I quietly mentioned to Mom a few weeks later that Mark and I were thinking about having our own small ceremony to renew our courthouse vows, now that we could afford a celebration, her response had been swift and definitive. Oh, honey, that's not really necessary, is it? You're already married, and with the baby coming, you'll have enough expenses. Besides, we're all still recovering from Sarah's wedding, maybe in a few years. A few years had turned into never, and I'd convinced myself I didn't really care about having a celebration. After all, the marriage itself was what mattered, right? Not the party, not the attention, not the feeling of being the center of your family's joy for one day, but lying in that hospital bed, I realized I had cared. I cared deeply about having my own special day, my own moment to feel celebrated and cherished. And more than that, I'd cared about the message behind the dismissal, that Sarah's happiness was worth any expense and effort. While mine was an inconvenient afterthought, the pattern went back even further. When we were kids, Sarah had been the one with piano lessons, dance classes, and summer camps. I'd been the one told we couldn't afford those extras for both girls, but that I could help Sarah practice or attend her recitals to be supportive. When Sarah needed a car for her senior year of high school, Dad had worked overtime for months to afford a down payment on something safe and reliable. When I'd asked about getting my license, I'd been told I could use Sarah's old bike to get around town and maybe think about a car when I had a job and could contribute to the payments. Sarah's college applications had been a family project, with Mom and Dad researching schools, helping with essays, and visiting campuses. When my time came, I'd been handed a stack of brochures for the local community college and told that was the smart, practical choice for someone more focused on family than career anyway. The most painful part wasn't even the inequality itself, it was how I'd been conditioned to accept it, to rationalize it, to even defend it. Sarah's more ambitious, I tell myself. Sarah has bigger dreams, as if my dreams were somehow smaller and less worthy of investment. Another contraction pulled me back to the present, and I gripped the bed rail as Patricia coached me through the breathing. Mark had stepped out to call his mother again, the fourth time in 2 hours, and I found myself grateful for his absence. His anxiety about disappointing his family was adding stress I didn't need. "You're doing beautifully," Patricia said, checking the monitors. "Baby's heartbeat is strong and steady. He knows what he's doing. He, my son. In a few hours, I'd be holding a little boy who would need me to be stronger than I'd ever been, to protect him from the kind of conditional love and dismissive treatment I'd endured." The thought filled me with a fierce determination I'd never felt before. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Patricia during a brief lull between contractions. "Of course, honey." "How many women come in here after their families have dismissed their labor pains?" Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. "More than you might think, more than should be acceptable." She adjusted my pillow and met my eyes directly. "But I want you to know something, Drew. The fact that they didn't take you seriously doesn't say anything about you or the validity of your experience. It says everything about them." Her words settled into my chest like a warm weight, and I realized this was what I'd been missing my entire life. Someone who saw my experience as inherently valuable, who didn't require me to prove or justify my needs before they could be acknowledged. Mark returned as I was working through another contraction, and I heard him mutter to Patricia, "This is taking forever. Is there anything you can give her to speed things up? Her family is starting to worry." Patricia's response was crisp and professional. "Mr. Lindsey, labor progresses at its own pace. Your wife's body knows what it's doing, and your job right now is to support her through it, not to manage everyone else's timeline." I opened my eyes and looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time the man I'd married. Someone who would always prioritize other people's comfort over my needs, who would always see my pain as an inconvenience to be managed rather than an experience to be honored. As another contraction built, I made a silent promise to the little boy who was fighting his way into the world. I would never let anyone dismiss his needs the way mine had been dismissed. I would never teach him that his worth was measured by how well he served others' expectations. I would break this cycle, even if it meant breaking everything else I built my life around. My birth plan had been carefully typed, printed, and laminated 3 copies tucked into my hospital bag like sacred documents. I'd spent weeks researching and writing it, detailing my hopes for a natural birth, my preferences for pain management, my wishes for skin-to-skin contact immediately after delivery. I'd imagined Mark advocating for my choices if I couldn't speak for myself, ensuring my voice was heard even in the most intense moments. But my hospital bag was at home, and my birth plan was just another casualty of my family's dismissal. As labor progressed through the night, I found myself grieving not just for the document itself, but for the version of myself who had believed my preferences mattered enough to write them down. "Is there anything specific you wanted for your labor experience?" Patricia asked during one of her frequent check-ins. It was nearly midnight now, and she'd been with me for hours. Her steady presence more comforting than my husband's anxious hovering. I had a birth plan, I said, and even those simple words felt heavy with disappointment. But it's at home. Tell me about it, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. We can still honor your wishes. So, between contractions, I shared my hopes with her, how I'd wanted to move freely during labor, to try different positions, to delay cord clamping, to have immediate skin-to-skin contact. Small things, really, that they'd felt important when I'd written them, like ways to claim some agency in an experience that often felt overwhelming and out of control. Patricia nodded at each preference, making notes and assuring me that most of them were easily accommodated. What about music? She asked. Did you want anything playing? I created a playlist months ago, soft, calming songs that I'd imagined would help me focus and breathe through contractions. But that playlist was on my phone, which had been dying, since Mark kept using it to call and update his family instead of focusing on me. It doesn't matter, I said, and realized how often I'd been saying those words my entire life. It doesn't matter what I want. It doesn't matter what I planned. It doesn't matter what would make me feel better. But Patricia shook her head firmly. It does matter, Drew. This is your experience, your baby, your birth. What would help you right now? The simple acknowledgement that my preferences had value made me tear up again. Something peaceful, I whispered. Something that makes this feel less scary. Within minutes, she'd found a classical music station on the room sound system, and the gentle strains of a string quartet filled the space. It wasn't my carefully curated playlist, but it was something beautiful in a moment that felt increasingly surreal and disconnected from everything I'd planned. Mark, meanwhile, had positioned himself in the corner of the room where he could maintain his constant phone vigil without Patricia's disapproving looks. I'd stopped counting his calls, but I could hear the stress in his voice as he tried to manage everyone's expectations and emotions from a distance. No, Mom, I can't just leave her here and come back later, he was saying during his latest conversation. Yes, I know you're worried about the food going bad. Can't Dad put the leftovers in the refrigerator? The absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. I was bringing his child into the world, and he was discussing leftover management with his mother. The turkey and mashed potatoes were receiving more consideration than my labor experience. Another contraction built, stronger than the previous ones, and I gripped the bed rails so hard my knuckles went white. Patricia was beside me instantly, coaching me through the breathing, her hand steady on my shoulder. You're at 8 centimeters, she announced after checking my progress. This baby is coming soon, 8 centimeters. We were in the final stretch, the point where labor becomes all-consuming and urgent. But Mark was still on his phone, still managing other people's feelings about my inconvenient timing. Mark, I called out as the contraction peaked, needing him to be present, to be with me for these crucial final hours. He held up one finger, the universal just a minute gesture, and turned slightly away to continue his conversation. I know. Mom, I know you had your heart set on the apple crisp tonight. Maybe Drew can make another one next week when this is all over. When this is all over, as if giving birth to our son was an inconvenience to be endured rather than a miracle to be celebrated. As if the arrival of our child was primarily significant because it would disrupt Sunday dinner rather than because it would change our lives forever. I felt something fundamental shift inside me, not just my body preparing for the final stage of labor, but my understanding of my marriage, my family, my place in the world. I was literally creating life, bringing a new person into existence, through strength and pain and determination I'd never known I possessed. And the people who claimed to love me most were worried about dessert. Patricia must have seen something change in my expression because she moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. Drew, I need you to focus on yourself and your baby now. Let everything else fade away. This is your time, your moment, your power. My power. I'd never thought of childbirth in those terms before, but she was right. This was the one thing I could do that no one else could do for me, the one experience that was entirely mine. My body knew what to do. My baby was ready to be born, and for the first time in my life, what everyone else wanted didn't matter at all. As another contraction began, I closed my eyes and let Patricia's voice guide me. Behind us, Mark was still talking quietly into his phone, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The only sounds that mattered were my breathing, the baby's heartbeat on the monitor, and Patricia's steady encouragement. That's it, Drew. You're doing exactly what you need to do. Trust your body. Trust yourself. Trust myself. What a radical concept for someone who'd spent 28 years doubting her own instincts and deferring to everyone else's judgment. But here, in this moment, I didn't have a choice. My body was taking over, and all I could do was surrender to its wisdom. The next contraction was different, deeper, more urgent, accompanied by a pressure that made me gasp. Patricia's eyes lit up with recognition. Drew, it's time to start pushing. Your baby is ready to meet you. At 3:47 a.m. on a Monday morning, Ethan Drew Lindsey entered the world with a lusty cry that cut through the quiet hospital room like a declaration of independence. As Dr. Martinez placed him on my chest, still slippery and perfect and impossibly real, I felt a love so immediate and fierce it took my breath away. The blanket that wrapped around him was one I'd knitted during my pregnancy. Soft yellow yarn worked into a simple pattern during countless evenings while Mark watched television. And I prepared for this moment. I'd stitched every row with such hope, imagining this exact scene, my baby warm against my skin, finally safe in my arms. Hello, beautiful boy, I whispered, and Ethan's cries quieted as if he recognized my voice from our months together. His tiny fingers unfurled and gripped mine with surprising strength, and I marveled at the perfection of his miniature fingernails, the delicate curve of his ears, the way his dark hair was already trying to curl. For perhaps 30 seconds, the room was filled with wonder and joy. Patricia was beaming, Dr. Martinez was smiling as she worked, and even Mark had finally put down his phone to stare in amazement at his son. He's perfect, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion, and for a moment I thought maybe this would change everything. Maybe becoming a father would shift his priorities, make him realize what truly mattered. But then his phone rang again. Instead of declining the call or silencing the phone, Mark glanced at the screen and said, "It's my mom. She's been waiting all night for news." I was still holding our son, our minutes-old son who was experiencing the outside world for the first time, when Mark stepped to the corner of the room and answered the call. "Hi, Mom, he's here. Born about 5 minutes ago." "Yes, Drew's fine." "No, I don't know how much he weighs yet. They haven't done all that stuff." All that stuff? The measurements and tests and procedures that would tell us about our son's health and development were reduced to stuff because his mother needed immediate gratification. I watched Dr. Martinez's expression tighten, almost imperceptibly, as Mark continued his conversation, describing Ethan's arrival as if it were a routine event rather than the miracle it was. Patricia caught my eye and gave me a look of solidarity and shared frustration. "Tell her we'll call back in a bit," I said quietly. But Mark was already deep in conversation, assuring his mother that everyone was healthy and that he'd send photos as soon as possible. Photos. He wanted to take pictures of our son before I'd even had a chance to truly meet him, before we'd had any private moments as a new family, because his mother's curiosity was more important than our bonding time. Ethan stirred against my chest and let out a small, perfect sound, not quite a cry, more like a sigh of contentment. I bent my head and breathed in his sweet baby smell, memorizing everything about this moment. His weight against me, the way his breathing matched mine, The incredible realization that I had created this perfect little person. Drew, we need to weigh him and do the initial health checks, Patricia said gently. But we can do skin to skin again right after. I nodded and reluctantly let them take Ethan to the warming station across the room. Even though I could see him and hear his healthy cries as they worked, I felt his absence like a physical ache. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, Patricia announced. 20 inches long, perfect Abwehr scores. This is one healthy baby boy. Mark finally ended his phone call and approached the warming station, pulling out his phone again to take pictures. Mom wants to see him, he explained, and started snapping photos from every angle. Can I hold him first? I asked, still feeling empty without Ethan's weight against me. Just a few quick pictures, Mark said, not looking up from his phone screen. Mom's been waiting all night, and Sarah wants to see him too. I told them I'd send photos right away. I stared at my husband, this man who had just become a father but was more focused on his phone than on his son. Mark, I'd like to hold my baby. The words came out firmer than I'd intended, and Mark looked up with surprise. Of course, just let me now, I said. And there was something in my voice that made both Mark and Patricia look at me with new attention. Patricia immediately scooped Ethan from the warming station and placed him back in my arms. Here's your mommy, little one, she said softly, and Ethan immediately settled against me, as if he knew exactly where he belonged. This time, Mark put his phone away and actually looked at us, really looked at his wife and son together for the first time. For a moment, I saw wonder in his expression, and hope fluttered in my chest. But then his phone buzzed with what I assumed was an incoming text, and I watched his eyes automatically flick toward the device. The moment was broken, and I realized, with crystalline clarity, that this pattern wasn't going to change just because we'd become parents. If anything, it was going to get worse. Now there would be even more people with opinions about our choices, more family members with expectations and demands, more ways for everyone else's needs to take precedence over ours. I looked down at Ethan, who was gazing up at me with those unfocused newborn eyes, and made him a silent promise. I would not let him grow up feeling invisible and unimportant. I would not teach him that other people's approval was more valuable than his own needs and feelings. I would not pass on the lessons I'd learned about making yourself small so others could feel big. He's beautiful, I whispered to Ethan, and meant it in every possible way. He was beautiful and perfect and worth fighting for. We both were. The sun was starting to rise outside the hospital window, painting the room in soft golden light. Somewhere across town, my family was probably just waking up, maybe wondering if they'd hear news about the baby today, Dot. But here in this quiet room, with my son in my arms and a future full of possibilities stretching ahead of us, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, Dot, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. Recovery at the hospital became an unexpected lesson in human behavior. The visitor log beside my bed told a story I hadn't anticipated, one that laid bare the true motivations of everyone who claimed to care about me and my new family. My parents arrived first, around noon on Monday, carrying a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing expressions of polite obligation. They spent exactly 12 minutes in my room. I timed it on the wall clock, and 11 of those minutes were focused entirely on Ethan. He's adorable, Mom said, holding him with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised children, but the emotional distance of someone visiting a neighbor's baby. Such a good size. Sarah was much smaller when she was born, you know. Even Ethan's birth weight, had to be compared to Sarah somehow. I watched my mother coo over my son while barely acknowledging me, and noticed that she never once asked how I was feeling, how the delivery had gone, or whether I needed anything. Dad took a few obligatory photos with his phone. mentioned that they couldn't stay long because they had an appointment to look at new carpeting and they were gone. No apology for their behavior at dinner. No acknowledgement that they'd dismissed my labor pains for hours. No recognition that they'd failed their daughter at one of the most important moments of her life, but they'd gotten their grandparent photos. For social media, which was apparently all that mattered, Sarah arrived an hour later with a gift bag from an expensive baby boutique and an air of someone checking an item off her to-do list. She immediately began positioning herself for selfies with Ethan, adjusting her hair and finding the best lighting. "I can't stay long," she announced while snapping photos. "I'm meeting David for lunch at that new place downtown. But I had to see my nephew and get some pictures. Had to get some pictures. Not had to meet my nephew or had to see how my sister was doing. Getting pictures was the primary objective. The social media content that would prove she was a loving aunt. She posted 3 photos to Instagram before she even left my room. Each one captioned with some variation of Aunt Sarah's first meeting. With little Ethan, #blessed, #AuntLife, #family. In every photo, I was either cropped out entirely or barely visible in the background, despite being the one who'd just spent 18 hours bringing this baby into the world. The contrast was stark. When my friend Melissa arrived that evening, she brought homemade soup, asked detailed questions about my labor experience, and held Ethan with the reverence of someone who understood what a miracle looked like. When she took photos, she made sure I was centered in every shot, looking radiant. Despite my exhaustion, "You did something incredible," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm so proud of you, Drew. You're amazing." Amazing. When was the last time a family member had called me amazing? When had any of them looked at me with pride rather than expectation? Over the next 2 days, the pattern continued. My college roommate brought books and magazines for my recovery. My neighbor from across the street delivered a week's worth of frozen meals. My former coworker spent an hour just listening to me talk about the birth experience, validating every feeling and celebrating every detail. Meanwhile, Mark's family focused entirely on the baby, treating me like an incubator who'd served her purpose. His mother arrived with an elaborate gift basket filled with items for Ethan clothes, toys, blankets, but nothing for me, the woman who'd just given birth to her grandson. "I hope you're planning to breastfeed," she said without preamble, settling into the chair beside my bed with the authority of someone preparing to deliver a lecture. "It's so important for the baby's development, and really, it's the least you can do after such an easy delivery." Easy delivery? 18 hours of labor that my family had dismissed as drama was now being reframed as easy, because it fit the narrative that my experience didn't matter. "It wasn't exactly easy," I said quietly, adjusting Ethan in my arms. "Oh, come now," she waved dismissively. "First babies usually take much longer. You were very fortunate. Now, about the feeding schedule, I have some recommendations based on what worked best when Mark was little." I listened to her detailed instructions about my son's care with growing bewilderment. This was the same woman who'd been more concerned about apple crisp than her daughter-in-law's labor pains, now positioning herself as an expert on my baby's needs. The most telling moment came when the nurse brought the visitor log for me to review standard procedure to track who'd been in contact with the baby. The pattern was unmistakable. Family members signed in for brief visits focused on photo opportunities, while friends and chosen family stayed longer, brought gifts for me as well as the baby, and actually engaged with my experience. "Interesting. Reading?" asked Patricia, who had been checking on me throughout my stay, despite technically being off duty. "Eye-opening," I replied, studying the names and timestamps. "My sister stayed 12 minutes. My friend from work stayed 2 hours." Patricia nodded knowingly. "We see this pattern a lot, unfortunately. Birth has a way of revealing people's true priorities. The ones who show up for you during the hard parts are the ones who really matter. Her words resonated deeply as I reflected on the past few days. While my family had treated Ethan's birth as an inconvenience followed by a photo opportunity, my chosen circle of friends had surrounded us with love, support, and genuine celebration. That evening, as visiting hours ended and Mark went home to check on things and update both our families, I found myself alone with Ethan for the first time since his birth. In the quiet of the hospital room, I studied his peaceful sleeping face and felt a clarity I'd never experienced before. This little boy deserved better than the conditional love and dismissive treatment I'd grown up accepting as normal. He deserved to be valued for who he was, not for how well he served others' expectations. He deserved family members who showed up not just for the good moments, but for the difficult ones too. I pulled out my phone and started a new note, titling it Things I Notice. Under it, I began documenting the patterns I was finally seeing clearly. Family visits, short, focused on photos, no interest in my experienced friend visits. Longer, brought support items, asked about my well-being. Mark's response to my labor, prioritized family's feelings over my needs, family's response to birth announcement, excitement about baby. Indifference to mother. It wasn't a formal journal, but something told me I might need this record later. Some instinct warned me that the patterns I was seeing now would only become more pronounced as time went on. As Ethan stirred and made the small sounds that meant he was waking up, I made him a promise. I'm going to learn to trust my instincts, little one, and I'm going to teach you to trust yours too. Outside my window, the city was settling into evening rhythms. Tomorrow we'd go home and begin our new life as a family of 3. But something fundamental had shifted during these hospital days. A recognition that the family I'd been born into and the family I was creating didn't have to follow the same patterns. Had a choice about what kind of mother I wanted to be, what kind of environment I wanted to create for my son, and what kind of treatment I was willing to accept from the people who claimed to love us. For the first time in my life, I was ready to start making those choices consciously and deliberately, even if it meant disappointing people who had never worried about disappointing me. Coming home from the hospital should have been a celebration, our first day as a family in our own space, beginning the beautiful chaos of life with a newborn. Instead, it became another lesson in how little my needs registered on anyone else's. Priority list. Mark carried Ethan's car seat while I walked slowly to our front door, still sore and exhausted from delivery. On our kitchen counter, I discovered a miracle, a detailed meal train schedule organized by my friend Jennifer from work. Color-coded spreadsheets showed who was bringing dinner each night for the next 2 weeks, with notes about dietary preferences and heating instructions. This is incredible, I said, studying the schedule with genuine amazement. Jennifer organized all this. Yeah, she called while you were in the hospital, Mark replied, already distracted by his phone. Kind of unnecessary though, right? I mean, your mom could just bring stuff over if we need it. I thought about my mother's 12-minute hospital visit and her complete lack of interest in my recovery needs. I don't think that's going to happen, Mark. Of course it will. She's a grandmother now. Everything's different. But everything wasn't different, at least not in the ways Mark assumed. By that afternoon, the differences were becoming starkly apparent. Jennifer arrived at 5:30 with a complete dinner: lasagna, salad, bread, and even dessert, plus a care package for me with tea, bath salts, and nursing pads. How are you feeling? She asked, settling onto our couch with genuine interest. Really feeling, not just the polite answer. I nearly cried at the simple recognition that I might have feelings worth asking about. Overwhelmed, happy but scared. Like my body isn't quite my own yet. She nodded knowingly. That's completely normal. The first few weeks are intense. Do you need anything specific? I can grocery shop, do laundry, whatever would help. When was the last time a family member had offered practical help without being asked? The contrast became even sharper when Mark's mother called an hour later. After a brief inquiry about the baby, she launched into her real agenda. "I've been thinking about the christening. We should probably start planning soon. I know a lovely photographer who could do the pictures, and I have some ideas about the guest list." We'd been home for 6 hours. I was still wearing the loose pants I'd packed for leaving the hospital because my regular clothes didn't fit yet. Ethan was crying every 2 hours, and I was trying to figure out the basics of newborn care. But apparently, the christening planning couldn't wait. "Mom, we haven't even discussed whether we want a christening," Mark said, and I felt a flicker of hope that he might actually support me in setting some boundaries. "Of course you want a christening," she replied with the confidence of someone who'd never had her opinions challenged. "It's tradition. Drew understands the importance of family. Traditions, don't you, Drew?" I was holding Ethan, who was fussing and clearly needed to nurse. But Mark's mother was waiting for my response to her presumptuous question. This moment felt like a test. Would I fall back into my old pattern of agreeing to keep the peace? Or would I start advocating for what my new family actually needed? "We'll discuss it when we're ready," I said firmly. "Right now, we're focused on getting settled with the baby." The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. Mark's mother wasn't used to being told that her timeline and preferences weren't automatically everyone else's priority. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose new mothers can be quite hormonal and emotional. We'll revisit this when you're thinking more clearly, hormonal and emotional." The classic dismissal used to invalidate any woman's perfectly reasonable boundaries. I felt my face flush with anger, but before I could respond, Mark was already smoothing things over. "She's just tired, Mom. We'll call you in a few days when things settle down." After he hung up, I stared at my husband in disbelief. "Did you just apologize for me setting a boundary about our own son's christening?" "She's just excited about being a grandmother," he said defensively. "You don't have to be so hostile about it." Hostile? I calmly stated that we needed time to settle in before making major decisions about our baby, and that was considered hostile. That night, as I sat in our nursery for Ethan's 2 a.m. feeding, I thought about the meal train schedule on our refrigerator. 12 different friends and acquaintances, people who owed me nothing, had organized themselves to support our family during these crucial first weeks. Meanwhile, both sets of grandparents had made exactly 0 offers of practical help. Instead, they'd focused on their own agendas, photo opportunities, christening plans, and social media content that would prove their involvement without requiring any actual investment of time or energy. Pulled out my phone and added to my growing list of observations. Day 1 home. Jennifer brings complete meal and asks about my needs. Day 1 home. Mark's mother calls to discuss christening plans, dismisses my request for time. Mark apologizes to his mother for my hostile boundary-setting meal train organized by friends. Number, offers of help from family as Ethan finished nursing and settled against my chest. I realized I was documenting more than just family dysfunction. I was creating a record of what real support looked like versus what performative care looked like. The people who truly cared about our well-being were showing up with practical help, asking about my needs, and respecting our timeline for major decisions. The people who cared more about appearances were pushing their own agendas and dismissing my feelings when I didn't comply. Outside our window, the neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional car passing by. Soon Mark would wake up and expect me to have Ethan settled so he could get a full night's sleep before work. Tomorrow there would be more calls from family members with opinions and expectations, more pressure to conform to their vision of how new parenthood should look. But there would also be another meal from the train, probably another text from Jennifer checking on how I was doing, and another opportunity to practice setting boundaries that protected my new family's peace. For the First time, I felt like I had allies in this process, people who saw my role as mother and wife as valuable enough to support rather than exploit. The question was whether I'd have the courage to keep, choosing their example over the patterns I'd grown up accepting as normal. Looking down at Ethan's peaceful face, I knew I didn't really have a choice. This little boy deserved a mother who knew her own worth, who modeled healthy boundaries, and who chose love over obligation every single time, even if that meant disappointing everyone, who trained me to put their comfort above my own. The christening dress arrived on a Thursday afternoon when Ethan was 3 weeks old, delivered by Mark's mother without warning or invitation. I was in my pajamas, trying to catch a nap while the baby slept, when the doorbell rang insistently. "Surprise," she announced, sweeping into our living room with a garment bag and an air of barely contained excitement. "I brought something very special for our little angel." She unzipped the bag with ceremonial reverence, revealing an elaborate white gown that looked like it belonged in a museum. The dress was clearly antique, with intricate hand embroidery and enough fabric for a small wedding train. "This is the family christening gown," she announced. Mark wore it, his father wore it, and his grandfather before him. It's over 100 years old and absolutely priceless. I stared at the ornate dress, trying to process what was happening. We still hadn't discussed whether we even wanted a christening, let alone when or where it might happen. But here was this family heirloom, presented as a fait accompli, that somehow committed us to a ceremony we'd never agreed to. "It's beautiful," I said carefully, "but we haven't decided about a christening yet." Mark's mother laughed, the same dismissive sound I'd heard from my own family so many times. "Oh, Drew, of course there's going to be a christening. You can't possibly be considering raising our grandson without proper spiritual foundation." "Our grandson. Not your son or the baby, our grandson." As if my role in his creation and daily care was secondary to their claim on his spiritual future. "We want time to consider all our options," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the exhaustion and frustration building inside me. "Options?" She looked genuinely confused, as if the idea that we might have preferences about our own child's religious ceremony was incomprehensible. "Drew, this isn't a menu at a restaurant. This is tradition, family heritage, the proper way to welcome a child into God's family." I felt the familiar pressure to capitulate, to smile and nod and let someone else make decisions about my life, to avoid conflict. But something had changed since Ethan's birth, some fundamental shift in my willingness to be steamrolled for the sake of other people's comfort. "Mrs. Lindsey," I said, and the formal address got her attention immediately. "I appreciate that this dress is meaningful to your family, but Mark and I need to discuss our own beliefs and decide what's right for our son before we commit to any ceremonies." Her expression shifted from confused to affronted. "I think sleep deprivation must be affecting your judgment, dear. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for the baby." There it was again, the suggestion that any disagreement with her plans must be due to my inadequacy rather than my legitimate right to make decisions about my own child. "I'm thinking very clearly," I replied. "I'm thinking about what Mark and I want for our family, not what everyone else expects." When Mark came home from work that evening, the dress was still hanging in our living room like a white silk ultimatum. His mother had left it behind, despite my request that she take it with her until we'd made our decision. "She means well," Mark said after I explained the afternoon's events. "The dress really is a family tradition." "What about what we want?" I asked. "What about our traditions?" "What traditions?" "We've been married 3 years and have a 3-week-old baby." "We don't have traditions yet." His dismissal stung more than I'd expected. Maybe we could start some. Maybe we could decide things for ourselves instead of just following whatever our families expect. Mark sighed heavily. "Drew, you're being dramatic again. It's just a christening. It's not like she's asking us to join a cult." "Dramatic again." The same word my mother had used when I was in labor, the same accusation used to dismiss my feelings whenever they inconvenienced someone else's plans. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. "I'm being thoughtful about a major decision regarding our son." That night, I called Jennifer and told her about the dress situation. Her response was immediate and validating. "You have every right to make your own decisions about Ethan's upbringing," she said firmly. "The fact that they're pressuring you 3 weeks after giving birth is honestly disgusting. Mark thinks I'm overreacting. Mark is wrong. This isn't about the dress or even the christening. It's about who gets to make decisions about your child. If you give in now, it's only going to get worse." Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't really about religious ceremony. It was about authority and autonomy. It was about whether Mark and I would be allowed to parent our son according to our own values, or whether we'd be expected to follow scripts written by previous generations. The next day, I folded the christening dress carefully and put it back in its garment bag. When Mark's mother called to discuss arrangements, I was ready. "We've decided to wait on the christening," I said before she could launch into her planning mode. "We want Ethan to be older so he can be part of the decision-making process." "Part of the decision-making process?" she repeated incredulously. "Drew, he's a baby. Babies don't make decisions about their spiritual welfare. Then we'll make the decision when we're ready, not when anyone else thinks we should be ready." The silence that followed was heavy with disapproval, but I didn't rush to fill it with apologies or explanations. I'd said what I meant, and I meant what I'd said. "I see," she said finally. "Well, I suppose when you're ready to prioritize your son's spiritual development over your own stubbornness, the dress will be waiting." After she hung up, I realized I wasn't upset or guilty or second-guessing myself. I felt something I'd rarely experienced before: proud. Proud of standing up for my family's autonomy, proud of refusing to be bullied into a decision we weren't ready to make, proud of modeling for Ethan that his parents could think for themselves. The dress stayed in our closet, waiting for a decision that would be made on our timeline according to our values when we were ready. And for the first time since becoming a mother, I felt like I was actually parenting rather than just following someone else's instruction manual. My journal started as a practical necessity tracking Ethan's feeding times and sleep patterns, but gradually evolved into something more essential. A record of the patterns I was finally brave enough to see dot at first. The entries were simple. Observations, week 4. Mark's mother called 3 times today about christening plans. Each time I said we weren't ready to decide, she suggested I was being difficult. Week 5. Sarah posted photos from her weekend in the mountains. Didn't ask how I'm doing or offer to visit Ethan. Week 6. Jennifer brought dinner and stayed to hold the baby while I showered. Asked if I needed anything else. Mark's family has made 0 offers of practical help, but as the weeks passed, the entries became more analytical, more honest about what I was experiencing. Week 8. Mark told his mother we'd probably do the christening in the spring to make Drew happy, as if my preferences are a minor obstacle to overcome rather than legitimate parenting decisions. He didn't discuss this with me first at week 10. Family dinner Sunday. I brought Ethan and spent the entire time in the kitchen, heating bottles and changing diapers while everyone else visited. No one offered to help. Sarah took 15 photos with the baby for Instagram, but didn't offer to hold him so I could eat. The breaking point came during week 12, at what should have been a celebration dinner for my parents' wedding anniversary. I'd spent hours preparing Ethan's bottles, packing his diaper bag, and coordinating his schedule so we could attend. The restaurant my family had chosen wasn't particularly baby-friendly, but I'd figured we could make it work within minutes of our arrival. It was clear that bringing a 3-month-old to an upscale steakhouse had been a mistake. Ethan was fussy from the unfamiliar environment and the disruption to his routine. Other diners were shooting disapproving looks our way as his cries echoed off the hard surfaces. "Can't you keep him quiet?" My father asked irritably as I tried to soothe Ethan with increasingly desperate bouncing and shushing. "Maybe you should take him outside until he settles down," my mother suggested, not looking up from her menu. I glanced around the table, hoping someone would offer to help or at least show some understanding. Instead, I saw annoyance, embarrassment, and the clear expectation that I would remove myself and my inconvenient baby so the adults could enjoy their meal in peace. "I'll just take him home," I said, gathering up the diaper bag with one hand while holding Ethan with the other. "That's probably best," Sarah agreed. "We can catch up another time when you can leave him with the sitter." Leave him with a sitter. My 3-month-old exclusively breastfed baby at a family dinner celebrating my parents' anniversary should be left home so I could participate in family life. Mark made no move to leave with us, didn't offer to help carry anything to the car, didn't suggest that maybe the family could choose more baby-friendly venues if they wanted us to participate in gatherings. I drove home alone with a crying baby while my family continued their celebration, and for the first time, I felt something stronger than hurt or disappointment. I felt angry. That night, my journal entry was different. Week 12, anniversary dinner disaster. Expected to manage everything alone, then remove myself when baby became inconvenient. Mark stayed for dinner. No one suggested family gatherings should accommodate the newest family member. Clear message: participate on their terms or don't participate at all. I'm starting to understand that the problem isn't that my family doesn't know how to support me. It's that they don't think I deserve support. I exist to serve their needs. And when I can't, I become invisible. Question: what would happen if I stopped accommodating everyone else's preferences and started stating my own? The question haunted me for days. I'd spent so long being the accommodating one, the peacekeeper, the family member who made things easy for everyone else. What would happen if I started advocating for myself and my son the way I advocated for everyone else's comfort? I decided to start small. When Mark's mother called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, a gathering that would require hours of travel with a 4-month-old, I said something I'd never said before. "That doesn't work for us," I said simply. "What do you mean it doesn't work?" she asked, clearly confused by the concept that her plans might not automatically become everyone else's plans. "I mean, traveling 3 hours with a baby for a dinner that won't start until 7 p.m. doesn't work for our family. We'll celebrate at home this year, but it's tradition," she protested. "We always do Thanksgiving together." "Then you're welcome to come to our house," I replied. "I'll be happy to cook." The silence was so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she said, "I'll need to discuss this with the family and get back to you." Discuss this with the family, as if my decision about where my own baby would spend Thanksgiving was a committee decision, rather than a parenting choice Mark and I were entitled to make. When Mark came home, he was clearly agitated. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "She's upset about Thanksgiving. I know. We discussed it. Drew, we can't just skip family Thanksgiving. It's important to her. It's important to me that our 4-month-old isn't overtired and overstimulated by a long car trip and late dinner. Our son's needs come first." Mark stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Since when do you make unilateral decisions about family plans?" "Since I became responsible for a baby's well-being," I replied. "Since I realized that someone needs to advocate for what's best for our family instead of just going along with what's easiest for everyone else." That night, I added another entry to my journal. Week 12. First time saying no to family plans. Mark doesn't understand why baby's needs should affect family traditions. beginning to see that he views my role as making everyone else comfortable, including at the expense of our son's well-being. Realization: I've been afraid of disappointing people who have never worried about disappointing me. The phone rang later. That evening, Sarah calling to talk sense into me about Thanksgiving, but I let it go to voicemail. For the first time in my adult life, I had more important things to do than manage other people's feelings about my perfectly reasonable boundaries. Had a baby to protect and a new version of myself to discover. The therapy appointment card felt revolutionary in my hands, a small rectangle of paper that represented something I'd never considered before. That my feelings and experiences might be important enough to deserve professional attention. I'd found Dr. Sarah Chun through my pediatrician's office, of all places. During Ethan's 4-month checkup, I'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed by family expectations, and Dr. Martinez had gently suggested that postpartum support came in many forms, including counseling for new mothers navigating relationship changes. It's very common, she'd assured me when I hesitated. Becoming a parent shifts all your other relationships, sometimes in ways that can be quite challenging. There's no shame in getting support as you figure out what feels right for your new family. The waiting room was peaceful, filled with soft lighting and comfortable chairs, such a contrast to the sterile brightness of medical offices or the chaotic energy of family gatherings. When Dr. Chun called my name, I felt nervous but also curious about what it might feel like to talk to someone whose job was simply to listen and help me understand my own thoughts. Dr. Chun was probably in her early 40s, with a warm smile, and the kind of presence that immediately made me feel less defensive. Her office was decorated with plants and soft artwork, creating an atmosphere that felt safe and private. "What brings you here today, Drew?" she asked once I was settled in a comfortable armchair. I'd rehearsed this answer during the drive over, but sitting there, I found myself telling the truth instead of the sanitized version I'd planned. "I think I'm finally realizing that my family doesn't actually care about me," I said, and was surprised by how stark the words sounded when spoken aloud. "That's a significant realization," Dr. Chun said gently. "Can you tell me what's led you to that conclusion?" So I told her about the labor and delivery, about the hospital visits focused on photo opportunities, about the christening dress delivered without consent, about being expected to remove myself and my baby from family gatherings when we became inconvenient. As I talked, Dr. Chun took occasional notes, but mostly just listened with the kind of focused attention I'd rarely experienced. She didn't interrupt to offer solutions or minimize my experiences or suggest that I was overreacting. "It sounds like you've been conditioned to prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own needs," she observed when I finished. "How long do you think this pattern has been going on?" "My whole life," I admitted. "I've always been the one who accommodates, who keeps the peace, who makes things easier for everyone else." "And what happened when you started setting boundaries after Ethan was born?" "They acted like I was being selfish and difficult, like wanting to make decisions about my own baby was somehow unreasonable." Dr. Chun nodded thoughtfully. "Drew, what you're describing sounds like what we call parentification when a child is given responsibilities for managing other people's emotions and needs that aren't age appropriate. It often continues into adulthood because the family system depends on that person continuing to fulfill that role. Parentification, having a name for it, felt both validating and heartbreaking. So this isn't normal family dynamics. Healthy families support each member's individual growth and respect appropriate boundaries. What you're describing: family members who only show up for photo opportunities, who dismiss your medical needs, who pressure you to make parenting decisions based on their preferences rather than your child's well-being, that's not healthy family functioning. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. "So I'm not crazy for feeling like something's wrong?" "You're not crazy at all. In fact, Recognizing these patterns and starting to set boundaries shows remarkable emotional intelligence and growth. We spent the rest of the session talking about what healthy boundaries might look like, how to communicate them clearly, and how to manage the inevitable pushback when family members realize I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for their comfort. Change is often most difficult for the people who benefit from the current dynamic, Dr. Chen explained. Your family has gotten used to your availability and accommodation. When you start prioritizing your own needs and your child's needs, they may escalate their pressure to get you back into the familiar role. What do I do when that happens? You remember that their discomfort with your growth doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. You remember that you're modeling healthy self-advocacy for your son, and you give yourself permission to choose relationships that add value to your life rather than relationships that drain your energy. Driving home from that first appointment, I felt something I'd rarely experienced. Hope that things could actually be different. Not hope that my family would suddenly change and start treating me better, but hope that I could change how I responded to their treatment. That evening, I added a new entry to my journal. Week 16, first therapy appointment. Dr. Chen says what? I've experienced is called parentification and that it's not normal or healthy. Says my boundaries are appropriate and that family pushback doesn't mean I'm wrong. Key insight. I don't have to convince anyone that my needs are valid. I just have to act like they are question. What would my life look like if I consistently treated myself with the same consideration I give everyone else? Mark noticed my mood when he got home from work. You seem different, he said, though I couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment or an observation. I had a good therapy session today, I replied. His expression shifted slightly. Therapy? For what? For learning how to set healthy boundaries and navigate the changes that come with becoming a parent. I thought things were going fine, he said, and I heard the defensiveness in his voice. Things are going fine with Ethan, I clarified. But I'm realizing that some of my other relationships need work. I didn't elaborate and Mark didn't ask for details, but I could see him processing the information, probably wondering if he was included in the category of relationships that needed work. He was, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. First, I needed to get stronger in my own understanding of what I deserved and what I was willing to accept. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time since Ethan's birth, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The voice recording I made at our next family dinner wasn't premeditated. It started as an attempt to capture Ethan's babbling for Mark's mother, who'd been pressuring us for weeks to bring him for another visit. But when the conversation turned to my new attitude, as my mother called it, some instinct told me to keep the app running. We were gathered around the same dining room table where my labor had been dismissed 6 months earlier, though now I saw the space differently. Instead of the warm family gathering place I'd once imagined it to be, I recognized it as a stage where certain performances were expected and deviation from the script was met with swift correction. Drew's been different lately, Sarah announced during the main course, as if I weren't sitting right there. More difficult. Difficult how? My father asked his fork, pausing halfway to his mouth. Well, she refused to come to Thanksgiving. She won't commit to the christening, and apparently she's seeing a therapist now. Sarah listed my transgressions like evidence in a court case. A therapist? My mother's voice rose with alarm. Drew, what on earth do you need a therapist for? You have a beautiful baby and a good husband. What more could you want? I felt the familiar pressure to minimize my needs, to reassure everyone that I wasn't really struggling, that their treatment of me hadn't affected me negatively. But Dr. Chen's voice echoed in my mind. You don't have to convince anyone that your needs are valid. I'm learning about healthy family dynamics, I said, simply, and figuring out what kind of mother I want to be. What's that supposed to mean? My father demanded. Are you saying we weren't good parents? The question was loaded with decades of conditioning. I was supposed to immediately backtrack, apologize for implying criticism, reassure them that they'd done their best. But Ethan was sitting in his high chair beside me, watching everything with those bright, curious eyes. And I thought about what I wanted him to learn from this moment. "I'm saying I want to do some things differently," I replied. "Like what?" Sarah challenged. "What exactly are you planning to do so differently?" I looked around the table, at my parents' defensive expressions, at Sarah's smirk, at Mark's obvious discomfort with the entire conversation. These people had dismissed my labor pains, ignored my needs as a new mother, and pressured me to make parenting decisions based on their preferences rather than my child's well-being. And they wanted to know what I planned to do differently. "For starters," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I want Ethan to grow up knowing that his needs matter. That when he's in pain or scared or needs help, the people who love him will take him seriously." "Of course his needs matter," my mother said impatiently. "But children also need to learn that they can't always be the center of attention." "I wasn't asking to be the center of attention when I was in labor," I replied quietly. "I was asking to be taken to the hospital." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing this conversation would end. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" Sarah said with an exaggerated sigh. "It was one night, Drew. One miscommunication." "You're acting like we committed some terrible crime. A miscommunication?" I repeated, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "Is that what we're calling it when a family laughs at a pregnant woman's labor pains and tells her to finish serving dinner?" "You're being dramatic again," my father said dismissively. "You weren't even that far along. First babies are always late." "I was 6 centimeters dilated," I said, and watched their expressions shift slightly. "I was in active labor for hours while you all told me I was being dramatic." My mother's face flushed. "Well, how were we supposed to know? You should have been more clear about what was happening. I told you I was having contractions." "I told you they were getting stronger. I asked to go to the hospital." "How much clearer could I have been?" "Your exact words were, 'I think I need to go to the hospital,'" Sarah said, as if she'd been recording the conversation herself. "You didn't sound urgent." "You've cried wolf before about pregnancy symptoms?" Cried wolf. They were actually comparing my legitimate medical concerns to false alarms, rewriting history to make their dismissal seem reasonable. "When did I cry wolf?" I asked. "That time you thought your water broke," Mark said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "And the false labor scare at 36 weeks. I stared at my husband, who was now participating in gaslighting me about my own medical experiences. "Those weren't false alarms, Mark. The doctor said it was normal to have questions and that I should call when I was concerned." "That's what first-time mothers are supposed to do. See," Sarah said triumphantly. "You admit you overreact to things. So when you were having some cramping at dinner, we naturally assumed it was another false alarm." The reframing was breathtaking in its audacity. My family had taken my history of responsible prenatal care following medical advice to contact my doctor with concerns and twisted it into evidence that I was unreliable and overly dramatic. "I want Ethan to know that seeking help when you're scared or in pain isn't crying wolf," I said, looking down at my son, who was happily gnawing on a piece of soft bread. "I want him to know that the people who love him will believe him when he says something is wrong." "Oh, please," my mother said. "You're going to raise a hypochondriac if you validate every little complaint. And I want him to know that his feelings matter, even when they're inconvenient for other people." I continued, ignoring her interruption. "That he doesn't have to minimize his needs to make everyone else comfortable." "What exactly are you accusing? Use of Drew?" my father asked, his voice getting louder. "Because it sounds like you're saying we're terrible people." "I'm saying I want to do better for my son than what I experienced growing up." The words hung in the air like an accusation, which I suppose they were. Sarah's face went red with indignation. Unbelievable, she said. You had a perfectly normal childhood. Mom and Dad worked hard to provide for us, took us on vacations, supported our activities. And now you're sitting here acting like we were some kind of abusive family. I didn't say abusive, I replied carefully. I said I want to do some things differently. Like what? My mother demanded. What exactly was so wrong with how we raised you? I thought about Dr. Chun's words about parentification, about the pattern of dismissing my needs, about the way my role in the family had always been to serve everyone else's comfort. I want Ethan to know that his value doesn't depend on how well he takes care of other people's feelings. I said finally. Mark's phone buzzed and he immediately picked it up, probably grateful for any distraction from this conversation, but his action proved my point more effectively than any words could have. Even now, during a difficult family discussion about our son's future, his attention could be diverted by whatever notification had just arrived. You're being ridiculous, Sarah said. Every family has dynamics. Every family has roles. That's just how families work. Maybe, I said, standing up and lifting Ethan from his high chair, but I get to decide how this family works. I gathered up Ethan's things while my family sat in stunned silence. Mark finally looked up from his phone, realizing that the evening was ending much earlier than planned. Drew, where are you going? He asked. Home, I said simply. This conversation isn't productive, and it's past Ethan's bedtime. As I buckled Ethan into his car seat in my parents' driveway, I realized my phone was still recording. 6 months after they dismissed my labor pains, my family had just spent an hour dismissing my feelings about that experience, rewriting history to justify their behavior, and implying that wanting better for my son was somehow an attack on them. The recording was 23 minutes long and captured everything. The gaslighting, the blame shifting, the complete inability to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been harmful. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but something told me I might need this evidence someday. Not for them, but for me, proof that what I remembered actually happened. Validation that my feelings about their treatment were justified. As I drove home with Ethan babbling contentedly in the back seat, I felt something I'd never experienced. After a family gathering, relief that it was over and certainty that I never had to subject myself to that kind of treatment again. The choice was mine to make, and I was finally ready to make it. The house key felt heavier than it should have as I pulled it off my keyring, a small piece of metal that represented decades of obligation, accommodation, and conditional love. I'd carried it since I was 16, through college, marriage, and motherhood, as if my parents' house would always be my fallback, my safety net, my true home. But sitting in Dr. Chun's office the week after the disastrous family dinner, I realized that house had never really been a safe space for me. It was a place where my needs were secondary, my feelings were inconvenient, and my worth was measured by how well I served everyone else's comfort. How did it feel to stand up for yourself at dinner? Dr. Chun asked. Terrifying, I admitted, and liberating, and completely exhausting. That's a normal response to setting boundaries with people who aren't used to you having any. How did your family react afterward? I pulled out my phone and played a portion of the recording, just enough to capture the gaslighting, the rewriting of history, the complete inability to acknowledge that their behavior had been harmful. Dr. Chen listened. With the same focused attention she always gave me, occasionally nodding or making brief notes. When the recording ended, she was quiet for a moment. Drew, what you've recorded here is a textbook example of a family system that's invested in maintaining dysfunction. When you try to change the dynamic by setting healthy boundaries, they escalate their efforts to pull you back into the familiar role. So this is normal? It's common in dysfunctional family systems, yes. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? I've been thinking about that question for days. The recording had made everything crystal clear my family wasn't going to suddenly develop empathy or respect for my boundaries. They were going to continue dismissing my feelings, rewriting history, and pressuring me to return to my role as the family accommodator. I think I need to step back, I said finally. Not permanently, maybe, but for now. I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly managing everyone else's emotions. What would that look like practically? No more Sunday dinners. No more automatic participation in family events. No more pretending that their treatment of me is acceptable just to keep the peace. Dr. Chun nodded approvingly. Those sound like healthy boundaries. How do you think they'll respond? Badly, I said with a rueful laugh. They'll probably say I'm being selfish and dramatic, that I'm breaking up the family, that I'm depriving Ethan of his grandparents and aunt. And how do you respond to those accusations? I remind myself that protecting my son from the kind of conditional love I experienced isn't selfish, it's good parenting. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house with Ethan in his car seat and the house key in my pocket. My mother was in her garden, wearing her old gardening gloves and the sun hat I'd given her for Mother's Day years ago. Drew. She called. Out, her voice artificially bright in the way it always was when she was trying to pretend nothing had happened. What a nice surprise. I was just thinking about calling you. I came to return this, I said, holding out the key. Her expression shifted from false cheer to confusion. Return what? Why? I won't be needing access to the house anymore, I said simply. I've decided to take a break from family gatherings. A break? She repeated as if I'd suggested taking a break from breathing. What do you mean, a break? I mean, I need some space to focus on my own family and figure out what kind of relationships I want to model for Ethan. My mother pulled off her gardening gloves with sharp, agitated movements. Drew, you can't be serious. You're talking about cutting off your family over one little disagreement. It wasn't one little disagreement, Mom. It was a pattern of dismissing my needs and feelings that's been going on my entire life. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We've always supported you. When? I asked genuinely. When have you supported me when it was inconvenient for you? When have you prioritized my needs over your own comfort? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew she couldn't think of an example. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I continued. I'm just choosing to invest my energy in relationships that add value to my life instead of relationships that consistently make me feel small and unimportant. Your own parents make you feel small and unimportant? The hurt in her voice was real, but so was the defensive anger underneath it. Yes, I said simply, they do. The word hung between us like a bridge I'd just burned. There was no taking it back, no softening it with explanations or apologies. It was just the truth, spoken clearly and without decoration. I think you should leave, my mother said, her voice cold and formal. I think so too, I agreed, tucking the key into her hand. Take care of yourself, Mom. As I drove away, Ethan babbling happily in the back seat, I felt something I'd never experienced after a family interaction. Peace. No guilt, no second-guessing. No immediate urge to call back and apologize for having boundaries. Just peace. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done something difficult but necessary. That evening, Mark came home to find me cooking dinner. While Ethan played on his blanket nearby, a picture of domestic contentment that didn't match his obvious agitation. Your mother called me at work, he said without preamble. She's very upset. I imagine she is, I replied, continuing to stir the pasta sauce. Drew, you can't just cut off your family. That's not how this works. I turned to face him fully. How does it work, Mark? How exactly are family relationships supposed to work? You work through disagreements. You compromise. You don't just walk away when things get difficult. I've been working through disagreements and compromising for 28 years, I said. What I haven't been doing is asking for the same consideration in return. So you're just going to deprive Ethan of his grandparents because they hurt your feelings? The phrasing was telling, as if my legitimate concerns about toxic family dynamics were just hurt feelings that I should get over for everyone else's convenience. I'm going to protect Ethan from learning that love is conditional and that his worth depends on how well he serves other people's needs. I replied, if my parents want a relationship with their grandson, they can start by treating his mother with basic respect. Mark stared at me as if I'd become a stranger. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm someone who finally knows her own worth, I said. I'm someone who's learned to trust her own instincts instead of constantly doubting them. I'm someone who's choosing to model healthy boundaries for her son. And what about me? He asked. What about our marriage? It was the question I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. That depends, I said carefully. Are you willing to prioritize our family over everyone else's expectations? Are you ready to support me in creating the kind of environment where Ethan can grow up feeling valued and respected? Mark was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options, calculating the cost of supporting me versus the cost of disappointing his family. Finally, he said, I need to think about this. I understand, I replied. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, remember that Ethan is watching everything. He's learning what love looks like, what respect looks like, what it means to stand up for the people you care about. That night, I made one final entry in my journal. Week 24, returned house key to parents. Told Mark that our marriage depends on his willingness to prioritize our family over others' expectations. Feel scared, but also more like myself than I have. In years, that key realization, I can't control how anyone else responds to my boundaries. I can only control whether I maintain them. For Ethan, I promise you will grow up knowing that your needs matter, that your feelings are valid, and that love shouldn't require you to make yourself small. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in my adult life, it was a future I was choosing rather than one that was being chosen for me. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning when Ethan was 8 months old, delivered by a courier who seemed apologetic about the gravity of what he was handing me. Mark had moved out 3 weeks earlier after making it clear that he couldn't choose between supporting his wife and maintaining peace with his family. I love you, he'd said during our last real conversation, but I can't live like this. I can't be in constant conflict with everyone I care about. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was willing to be in constant conflict with me to avoid conflict with everyone else. But by then, I'd learned to recognize the pattern. I was expected to absorb all the discomfort so others could remain comfortable. For the first time in my adult life, I said no. The papers were thick and formal, full of legal language that reduced our 3-year marriage to asset divisions and custody arrangements. But tucked between the schedules and financial disclosures was something that took my breath away. Mark was requesting primary custody of Ethan. His reasoning, according to the documents, was that I'd become emotionally unstable since giving birth, that I'd alienated myself from family support systems, and that I was seeking unnecessary psychological treatment. That indicated I was unfit to be the primary caregiver. I read the accusations 3 times before the full impact hit me. My husband, the man who had prioritized phone calls to his mother over coaching me through labor, was using my therapy and boundary setting as evidence that I was an unfit mother. I called Jennifer first, my hand shaking as I dialed her number. He's trying to take Ethan, I said when she answered. Mark is saying I'm unstable because I went to therapy and stopped accommodating my family's dysfunction. What? Her voice was sharp with outrage. Drew, that's insane. You're the most devoted mother I know. You've been doing everything for that baby since day one. His lawyer is arguing that cutting off contact with my parents shows I'm emotionally unstable and that seeking therapy proves I can't handle motherhood. That's not how any of this works, Jennifer said firmly. Going to therapy shows you're responsible and self-aware. Setting boundaries with toxic family members shows you're protecting your child. Any decent family court judge will see that. But doubt crept in anyway, the familiar voice that had been trained to question my own perceptions and instincts. What if they were right? What if my need for boundaries and space really was excessive? What if I was damaging Ethan by keeping him away from his extended family? Dr. Chun's office had become my sanctuary over the past months, and her response to the custody filing was immediate and reassuring. Drew, what Mark's attorney is describing isn't emotional instability, it's emotional growth. The fact that you recognize dysfunction and took steps to protect yourself and your child shows remarkable strength and parenting instinct. But what if the judge doesn't see it that way? What if they think a mother should prioritize family, harmony over everything else? Then we'll help them understand what healthy parenting actually looks like, she said firmly. I'll write a letter for your attorney explaining that your therapy, participation, and boundary setting are signs of good mental health, not instability. My attorney, Rebecca Martinez, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in custody cases involving family dysfunction. When I showed her the papers, her expression grew increasingly incredulous. "This is garbage," she said bluntly. "Absolute garbage. He's trying to weaponize your mental health awareness against you, which is not only ethically questionable but legally weak." "But what if, Drew?" She interrupted gently. "Let me ask you something. In the 8 months since Ethan was born, who has gotten up for night feedings? Me. Who takes him to doctor appointments? Me. Who organized his feeding schedule, managed his sleep routine, researched child development, arranged for childcare when needed? Me," I said, beginning to see her point. "And during this time, where was Mark?" I thought about the endless phone calls to his family, the way he'd continued prioritizing everyone else's comfort over our needs, his complete absence during the moments when Ethan needed calm, consistent care. "Managing everyone else's feelings about our family decisions," I said. "Exactly. You've been the primary parent from day one. Mark's been the primary family diplomat. Now he's trying to argue that your competence as a mother should be questioned because you stopped enabling dysfunction. It's not going to work." Over the following weeks, as we prepared for the custody hearing, I documented everything. The meal train organized by friends while family made no offers of help, the recording of my family dismissing my concerns, the pattern of Mark prioritizing others' comfort over our child's needs. But the most powerful evidence was Ethan himself. At 8 months old, he was a happy, healthy, securely attached baby who clearly thrived in my care. His pediatrician wrote a letter noting his excellent development and the quality of care he'd received. His daycare teachers, when asked, described him as well-adjusted and me as an attentive, involved mother. The hearing itself was surreal, sitting in a courtroom while strangers decided whether I was fit to raise my own child. Mark's attorney painted a picture of me as an unstable woman who'd abandoned her family support system and sought unnecessary mental health treatment. My attorney countered with documentation of my responsible parenting, evidence of my family's dysfunction, and expert testimony about the importance of setting boundaries to protect children from toxic dynamics. When the judge asked me directly why I'd chosen to limit contact with my family, I gave the same answer I'd given Dr. Chun months earlier. "Your Honor, I want my son to grow up knowing that his needs matter, that his feelings are valid, and that love shouldn't require him to sacrifice his well-being for other people's comfort. I've learned that I can't teach him those lessons while continuing to model the opposite behavior in my own relationships." The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Primary custody to me, with generous visitation for Mark, contingent on his commitment to supporting Ethan's well-being over managing extended family expectations. Mr. Lindsey, the judge said directly to Mark, your wife's decision to seek therapy and establish boundaries with family members who dismissed her medical needs during labor shows wisdom, not instability. I'd encourage you to consider your own relationship with these dynamics. Walking out of that courtroom with legal validation of my fitness as a mother felt like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on for months. I wasn't the problem, I was the solution. I wasn't unstable, I was finally becoming stable. I wasn't damaging my child, I was protecting him. That evening, I updated my journal for the last time. Week 32, custody hearing complete, primary custody, awarded. Judge validated my boundary setting as good parenting, not instability. Final realization, the people who benefit from dysfunction will always pathologize your healing. But healing is still the right choice. To future Drew. Trust your instincts, protect your peace. Remember that your son is watching and learning what love should look like. The hardest part was over. Now came the beautiful, terrifying work of building a new life based on my own values instead of everyone else's expectations. I was ready. 1 year later, as I watched Ethan toddle around our apartment on unsteady legs, I marveled at how different our life had become. The space was smaller than the house I'd shared with Mark, but it felt infinitely larger, filled with light, laughter, and the kind of peace that comes from living authentically. The invitation I was addressing felt symbolic. Bright yellow cardstock announcing Ethan's first birthday party, to be held in the community center down the street. The guest list was carefully curated. Jennifer and her family, my former co-worker Maria, Dr. Martinez and her kids, 3 other single mothers I'd met through a support group, and Rebecca, my attorney who'd become an unexpected friend. Notably absent were my parents, Sarah, and Mark's extended family. Mark would be there. Of course, our custody arrangement had evolved into something that actually worked for Ethan's benefit, rather than anyone else's convenience. But the days of obligatory family gatherings where my comfort was sacrificed for everyone else's expectations were over. Mama, Ethan said, pulling himself up against my leg and offering me a drool-covered wooden block. His vocabulary was limited, but his smile could light up a room. He was confident, curious, and remarkably secure for a child whose family had gone through such upheaval. Thank you, baby, I said, accepting the block like it was a precious gift. Are you excited about your party? He babbled something that might have been party or might have been happy, then tottered off to investigate a toy truck that had rolled under the coffee table. Watching him explore his world with such fearless enthusiasm reminded me daily that I'd made the right choice in protecting his environment from the conditional love and constant criticism. I'd grown up accepting that my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, the man I'd been seeing for the past 3 months. We'd met at the single-parent support group, where he'd been navigating his own journey of leaving a marriage that had become more about family expectations than the actual partnership. Can I bring anything for tomorrow? I make excellent chocolate chip cookies, and I promise not to take over your party planning like some pushy new boyfriend. I smiled at his message. Michael understood boundaries in a way that felt revolutionary. After years with someone who saw my needs as obstacles to manage rather than priorities to honor, he'd been the one to suggest that maybe Ethan's first birthday should be about celebrating Ethan, not about providing photo opportunities for relatives who'd shown minimal interest in the day-to-day reality of raising him. Cookies would be perfect, I texted back. And thank you for understanding that this is Ethan's day, not a family reunion. That's what makes it so beautiful, he replied immediately. You're teaching him that celebrations should actually be celebratory, not diplomatic. Missions. The contrast with my old life was striking. Mark had already texted twice about whether his mother could attend the party, despite the fact that she'd made exactly 3 attempts to visit Ethan in the past year each time, demanding that I accommodate her schedule and preferences rather than what worked for a toddler's routine. She's his grandmother, Mark had said during our last conversation about this. Don't you think he deserves to know his grandparents? He deserves to know people who value him for who he is, not for how well he serves their emotional needs. I'd replied, if your mother wants to be part of his life, she can start by respecting his primary caregiver. It was a boundary I'd learned to hold without guilt. Though it had taken months of therapy and practice to get there, the party planning itself had been a joy rather than a source of stress. Instead of worrying about dietary restrictions for difficult relatives or managing competing agendas and egos, I'd focused entirely on what would make Ethan happy: bright decorations, simple food, and plenty of space for him to play with other children. Jennifer had offered to help set up. Maria was bringing her famous potato salad, and Dr. Martinez was planning to arrive early so her kids could help with the decorations. These people had shown up consistently for Ethan and me, not because they were obligated to, but because they genuinely cared about our well-being. The morning of the party, I woke up feeling something I rarely experience before big family events: excitement instead of dread. There would be no tense conversations about my attitude, no pressure to accommodate unreasonable demands, no need to manage anyone's feelings about my parenting choices, just celebration, joy, and the chance to honor a little boy who deserved to feel cherished for exactly who he was. As I dressed, Ethan in his special birthday outfit, a soft blue shirt with a dinosaur that he'd picked out himself from a catalog. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Dr. Chun the previous week. How does it feel to be planning Ethan's birthday entirely according to what feels right for your family? She'd asked. Like I'm finally learning what love is supposed to feel like, I'd answered. Not conditional, not complicated, not dependent on my performance or compliance, just love. And how do you think this will affect Ethan's understanding of relationships? I think he'll grow up knowing that the people who truly love him will show up for him consistently, not just when it's convenient or photogenic. I think he'll understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect and consideration. Looking at my son now, sitting on the floor and clapping his hands with pure delight at his reflection in a shiny balloon, I felt confident that we were on the right path. The people who would attend his party had earned their place in our lives through consistent kindness, genuine support, and respect for our boundaries. They were choosing to celebrate with us not because they felt obligated, but because our joy brought them joy. Ready for your party, birthday boy? I asked, scooping him up for a hug. Ethan laughed and patted my cheek with his small hand, as if he understood that this day would be different from the family gatherings of the past, not because it would be perfect, but because it would be real. For the first time in my life, I was hosting a celebration based entirely on love rather than obligation. The guest list included only people who added value to our lives. The schedule prioritized Ethan's needs over adult convenience, and the entire event was designed around genuine joy rather than family politics. It felt like the beginning of everything. 2 years have passed since that Sunday dinner when my family dismissed my labor pains, and sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed. As I sit here writing this, Ethan is napping peacefully in his toddler bed, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a child who feels completely safe and loved. The new family photo on our mantle tells a different story than the formal portrait that used to hang in my parents' hallway. This one was taken at the beach last month. Michael, Ethan, and me, all sandy and sunburned and laughing at something ridiculous Ethan had just said. We're not posed or perfect, but we're genuinely happy, and that happiness radiates from every pixel. This is what love looks like when it's not conditional. when it's not dependent on performance or compliance or keeping the peace at any cost. This is what family looks like when it's chosen rather than endured. Ethan is now 2.5, a bright, confident little boy who knows his needs matter and his feelings are valid. When he's upset, we comfort him instead of dismissing his emotions as dramatic. When he has preferences about his food or clothes or activities, we take them seriously instead of overriding them for adult convenience. Last week, he fell down at the playground and scraped his knee. While I was cleaning the wound and applying a bandage, he said through his tears, "Mama, it really hurts." "I know it does, baby," I replied, kissing his forehead. "Thank you for telling me. I'm going to take good care of it." Such a simple exchange, but it represents everything I wanted to change about how children's experiences are received and validated. Ethan will never have to wonder if his pain is real or important enough to deserve attention. He'll never have to minimize his needs to make adults comfortable. Mark has evolved too, though it took losing his family to realize what really mattered. The custody arrangement that felt so contentious during our divorce has become a source of genuine co-parenting. He's learned to prioritize Ethan's well-being over his extended family's expectations, and our conversations now focus on what's best for our son rather than what will keep everyone else happy. "I was wrong," he told me during one of our recent conversations, about the therapy, about the boundaries, about everything. "You were protecting him, and I was too scared to see it." It was an apology I'd stopped expecting but deeply appreciated. Not because I needed his validation to know I'd made the right choices, but because it meant Ethan would grow up with two parents who understood that love means supporting someone's growth, not controlling their choices. My relationship with my birth family remains complicated. My parents have made a few attempts to reconcile, usually around major holidays or Ethan's milestones, but they've never acknowledged the harm their behavior caused or shown genuine understanding of why boundaries were necessary. Sarah sent a birthday card for Ethan this year, the first contact she'd initiated in over a year. Inside, she'd written, "Hope we can all be family again someday," but being family was never the problem. The problem was the conditions attached to that family membership, the unspoken rules that my needs would always be secondary to everyone else's comfort. I've learned that you can love people and still refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. You can wish for relationships to be different while protecting yourself from their current reality. You can grieve the family you wished you'd had while building the family you actually need. Dr. Chun and I still meet monthly, though our conversations have shifted from crisis management to growth maintenance. Last session, she asked me what I wanted other women in similar situations to know. That your instincts are probably right, I said without hesitation. That seeking help and setting boundaries isn't dramatic or selfish, it's responsible. That your children are watching everything and learning what love should look like from how you allow yourself to be treated. "And what about the guilt?" she asked. "The guilt is part of the programming," I replied. "We're taught that prioritizing our own well-being is selfish, that maintaining boundaries makes us difficult, that protecting our children from dysfunction makes us vindictive. But guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it just means you're doing something different." Michael has been a revelation in understanding what partnership can look like when both people are committed to each other's growth rather than each other's compliance. When Ethan has a meltdown, Michael doesn't tell me I'm handling it wrong or suggest that my parenting approach is too permissive. Instead, he asks how he can help, when I need to attend a therapy session or have coffee with a friend. He doesn't frame it as babysitting his own stepson or doing me a favor. He sees supporting my mental health and friendships as an investment in our family's overall well-being. "You know what I love about our life?" he said recently while we were watching Ethan play in our small backyard. "There's no drama, no hidden agendas, no walking on eggshells, no wondering who's going to be upset about what. It's just peaceful. Peaceful. What a revolutionary concept for someone who'd grown up believing that family meant constant, emotional management, and diplomatic. Navigation. The single mother support group I joined after my divorce has become one of my most treasured communities. We meet twice a month, sharing resources, celebrating victories, and reminding each other that choosing our children's well-being overextended. Family's comfort is not just acceptable, it's exemplary parenting. Last month, a new member joined. The group, a young woman whose family had dismissed her postpartum depression as new mother blues and pressured her to stop taking medication because it might affect breastfeeding. As she told her story, I saw my own journey reflected in her struggle to trust her instincts over everyone else's opinions. You're not crazy, I told her after the meeting. Your feelings are valid, your needs matter, and protecting your mental health is protecting your baby. The people who love you should want you to get better, not suffer in silence for their comfort. She started crying then, the relief of being believed and supported overwhelming her composure. I thought maybe I was being dramatic, she whispered. Dramatic is their word for inconvenient, I replied. You're not dramatic, you're human, and you deserve help. These conversations remind me how far I've come and how important it is to share what I've learned. The woman who couldn't advocate for herself during labor has become someone who helps other women recognize their own worth and trust their own voices. Tonight, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked me to tell him about the day he was born. It's become one of his favorite bedtime stories, though my version focuses on the joy of meeting him rather than the family drama that surrounded his arrival. Tell me about when I was in your tummy, he said, settling against his pillow. You were so excited to meet us, I said, stroking his hair. You decided you were ready to be born during dinner, and Mama had to tell everyone that it was time to go to the hospital so you could come out safely. And then I came out, and then you came out, and you were the most beautiful baby anyone had ever seen. The doctors and nurses all said you were perfect, and Mama cried happy tears because I loved you so much. It's the truth, just not the whole truth. Someday, when he's older, I might share the more complicated parts of his birth story. But for now, he gets to live in a world where his arrival was celebrated without reservation, where his needs are always taken seriously, where love is simple and unconditional. As I write this final chapter, I'm sitting at the kitchen table that Michael built for our small apartment sturdy oak that will last for decades, with rounded corners so Ethan can't hurt himself if he runs into it. It's not expensive or fancy, but it's made with love and intention, designed specifically for our family's needs. Tomorrow is Ethan's 3rd birthday, and we're having another small celebration with our chosen family. Michael is making his famous chocolate chip cookies, Jennifer is bringing decorations, and Dr. Martinez promised to arrive early with face paints and bubbles. Mark will be there too, bringing a thoughtful gift and genuine enthusiasm for his son's special day. We found our rhythm as co-parents who prioritize Ethan's happiness over past hurts or future fears. There will be no family drama, no hidden agendas, no pressure to perform gratitude for treatment that falls short of love. Just celebration, joy, and the beautiful ordinariness of people who genuinely care about each other gathering to honor a little boy who knows he matters. If you're reading this and recognizing parts of your own story, if you've ever been called dramatic for having needs, difficult for having boundaries, or selfish for protecting your children from dysfunction, please know that you're not alone. Your instincts are probably right. Your feelings are valid. Your children are watching and learning what love should look like. You have permission to choose peace over chaos, growth over comfort, authenticity over approval. You have permission to build a life based on your values rather than everyone else's expectations. Most importantly, you have permission to trust yourself. The family that matters most is the one you create through intention, respect, and genuine Love, whether that's the family you were born into, the one you build from scratch, or some combination of both. Choose the love that chooses you back. Choose the relationships that celebrate your growth rather than punish it. Choose the family that sees your worth as inherent rather than conditional. Your children are watching, and they deserve to see what real love looks like. So do you.